In the heart of the Arabian Peninsula, where caravans crossed paths and fortunes were made on the silk and spice routes, there lived a man who would witness one of history's most profound transformations. His name was Abu Sufyan ibn Harb, merchant, warrior, adversary, and ultimately, convert. This is not a simple story of heroes and villains. This is the story of a man caught between two worlds, between the old gods and a new message that would reshape civilization itself. For more than 2 decades, Abu Sufyan would be remembered as Islam's greatest enemy. But history had a different ending in mind. Who was this enigmatic figure, and how did he transform from the Prophet Muhammad's fiercest enemy to a pillar of Islam? Watch till the end to know the full story, and make sure you hit the like button. Subscribe for more educative history from us. Born around 560 CE in Mecca, 10 years before the legendary Year of the Elephant, Abu Sufyan entered a world dominated by the Quraysh tribe, guardians of the sacred Kaaba and masters of Arabian trade routes. His father, Harb ibn Umayyah, was a commander in the brutal Fijr Wars, tribal conflicts that scarred the peninsula. Abu Sufyan's mother, Safia, came from a lineage of warriors. From youth, he was groomed for leadership. Abu Sufyan ibn Harb was born into member of the Banu Umayyah clan, one of the most powerful families of the Quraysh. He possessed everything a man of his time could desire: wealth, status, and respect. The year is 570 CE. Mecca is the beating heart of Arabian commerce and spirituality. Inside the sacred Kaaba stand 360 idols, one for each day of the lunar year. As a merchant, Abu Sufyan amassed wealth through caravans to Syria and beyond. He became one of the Quraysh's foremost influential nobles, his word law in tribal councils. But this golden age of polytheism and profit was about to shatter. His marriage to Hind bint Utbah united 2 powerful families. Hind was no ordinary woman. She was intelligent, outspoken, and as proud as her husband. Together, they represented the pinnacle of Meccan society. But beneath Mecca's prosperity, tension was building. The wealthy grew wealthier, the poor grew desperate. Tribal warfare was constant. Into this world, a message was about to emerge that would challenge everything Abu Sufyan believed in. In the year 610 CE, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, a respected merchant known for his honesty, began to preach a revolutionary message. There is only one God. All people are equal before him. The idols must come down. Whispers of monotheism spread like wildfire. Abu Sufyan watched as his distant cousin gained followers. At first, they were mostly the poor, the enslaved, the marginalized. But then, prominent figures began to convert. The Quraysh response was brutal. They tortured and killed Muslim converts, especially those without tribal protection. They wanted to crush this movement before it grew too powerful. Abu Sufyan's enmity toward the Prophet was calculated, less fiery than Abu Jahl's but no less dangerous. He viewed Islam as a disruption to trade and tribal unity. When Muslims faced persecution, Abu Sufyan stood by, his silence a weapon. Where was Abu Sufyan during this early persecution? The sources are unclear. He was not yet the leader of the opposition. But he was watching, calculating, waiting. When a group of Muslims fled to Abyssinia seeking refuge, the Quraysh sent emissaries to bring them back. The message was clear: this faith would not be tolerated. But something remarkable was happening. Despite the persecution, despite the torture, despite the economic pressure, the Muslims would not renounce their faith. Abu Sufyan had never seen anything like it. And then, everything changed. In 622, Muhammad and his followers escaped to Medina. The Muslims had a city now. They had freedom to worship. And they would soon have an army. The Prophet's migration to Medina marked a turning point. Abu Sufyan, now de facto leader of the Quraysh after Abu Jahl's rise, orchestrated resistance. In 624 CE, leading a lucrative caravan from Syria, he evaded a Muslim raid but sparked the Battle of Badr. To know about the Battle of Badr, check the channel for the story of the Battle of Badr. Though Abu Sufyan diverted his caravan safely, the Quraysh army clashed with Muslims. The polytheists suffered a crushing defeat. Abu Sufyan lost his son Hanzala, another, Amr, was captured and ransomed. Vengeance burned in his heart. Badr was a humiliation. Abu Sufyan's response: rally the tribes for Uhud, seeking to erase the stain. Muhammad's message was no longer just words, it was backed by military victory. 1 year after Badr, in 625 CE, Abu Sufyan led 3,000 warriors to Uhud. Abu Sufyan stood as the undisputed leader of Meccan resistance. He had assembled an army of 3,000 men. This time, there would be no mistakes. His wife, Hind, demanded to accompany the army. Her father had died at Badr. She wanted revenge, and she would have it. At first, the Muslims were winning. But when Muslim archers abandoned their positions prematurely, Abu Sufyan's cavalry, led by Khalid ibn al-Walid, turned the tide. The Muslims were routed. Muhammad himself was wounded. Dozens of Muslims lay dead. Among them was Hamza, the Prophet's beloved uncle and one of Islam's greatest warriors. What happened next would stain the victory. Hind, consumed by her desire for revenge, mutilated Hamza's body. Hamza, the Prophet's uncle, was slain. Abu Sufyan stood atop a hill, praising idols, exalted be Hubal. But victory slipped away. The Prophet survived. In the years that followed, Abu Sufyan would lead more expeditions against the Muslims. But something had changed. The certainty was gone. In 627 CE, Abu Sufyan assembled a coalition force of 10,000 men, the largest army ever seen in Arabia. This would be the final confrontation, the end of Islam, or so he thought. But when they arrived, they found something unprecedented in Arabian warfare, a massive trench that cavalry could not cross. Muhammad had learned from Persian military tactics. Abu Sufyan's army was stalled. Days passing, tents being battered by wind. Soldiers cold and hungry. Abu Sufyan looking increasingly frustrated. Days turned into weeks. Food ran low. A harsh windstorm struck the besieging army. The coalition began to fracture. There's a moment during the siege where Abu Sufyan apparently realized it was over. Heroes was sitting in the cold, watching his grand coalition fall apart, and understanding that he could not defeat Muhammad through military force. After a month, Abu Sufyan ordered a retreat. 10,000 men had failed to defeat an opponent they outnumbered 3-1. The military phase of the conflict was effectively over. Abu Sufyan returned to Mecca a defeated man. Not defeated in battle, he had barely fought. Defeated by reality. Islam was not going away. It was growing stronger, and Mecca was running out of options. For nearly 20 years, Abu Sufyan had resisted Muhammad's message. He had fought in deserts and mountains. He had seen friends die. He had ordered attacks and led armies, all to preserve a world that was already gone. But the most remarkable chapter of his life was still to come. In 628, an extraordinary thing happened. Muhammad and the Quraysh signed a peace treaty. For 10 years, there would be no warfare. Pilgrims could visit Mecca safely. Tribes could choose their alliances freely. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah seemed like a Quraysh victory at first, but it was actually brilliant strategy by Muhammad. It gave Islam legitimacy as a political power, and it gave people time to see the faith without the fog of war. For 2 years, an uneasy peace held. Abu Sufyan, now in his 60s, likely hoped this was how it would end, with a negotiated coexistence. But tribal politics had other plans. When the Banu Bakr tribe, allied with Quraysh, attacked the Khuzar tribe, allies of Muhammad, the treaty was shattered. Blood had been spilled. Muhammad demanded justice. Abu Sufyan knew immediately this was catastrophic. The treaty was their protection. Without it, nothing stood between Mecca and Muhammad's growing power. In a desperate gambit, Abu Sufyan rode to Medina himself, alone and unarmed, to negotiate a renewal of the peace. It was an act of either courage or desperation. Probably both. Imagine this journey. Abu Sufyan, once the most powerful merchant in Arabia, commander of armies, leader of Quraysh, now riding alone to beg for peace from the man he had spent 20 years trying to destroy. The Medina he entered was not the vulnerable settlement he had besieged 5 years earlier. This was the capital of a rising power. Abu Sufyan went first to his daughter, Habiba, who had converted to Islam years before. She refused to let him sit on Muhammad's prayer mat. His own daughter turned him away. Abu Sufyan meeting with Abu Bakr, then Umar, then Ali. Each one rejecting his pleas. It must have been humiliating. Everyone rejected his overtures. Finally, he met with Muhammad himself, and Muhammad gave him nothing. No promises, no renewed treaty, nothing. What did Abu Sufyan see when he looked at Muhammad? Did he see the orphan boy he had once known? The merchant who used to trade in these same markets? Or did he see something else, a man transformed by absolute certainty? Abu Sufyan returned to Mecca with nothing. The treaty was dead, and he knew what was coming. In 630 CE, Muhammad assembled an army of 10,000 men, ironically, the same number Abu Sufyan had once brought to Medina. But this army moved with a unity and purpose Abu Sufyan's coalition had never possessed. They marched not to destroy, but to liberate. Muhammad had given orders. There would be no bloodshed unless absolutely necessary. Mecca would be conquered through power and mercy, not vengeance. As the army approached, Abu Sufyan rode out once more. Not to fight, to see, to understand what 20 years of resistance had led to. There's a moment here that the sources describe beautifully. Abu Sufyan looks at this massive army and asks, who could stand against this? And that's when he realizes, the game is over. The old world is gone. Abbas, Muhammad's uncle, brought Abu Sufyan to the Prophet's tent. The two men faced each other, the rebel and the establishment, the Prophet and the merchant prince. For the last time as enemies. What was said in that tent, we can only partly know from ancient sources. But we know what happened next. Abu Sufyan converted to Islam that night. Was it sincere? Was it political survival? The sources debate this, but I think we have to understand, these aren't mutually exclusive. Sincerity and political reality can coexist. Muhammad granted Abu Sufyan an extraordinary privilege. His home would be a sanctuary, anyone who entered it would be safe. It was a gesture of respect to a defeated enemy. The conquest was almost bloodless. Muhammad granted general amnesty. The idols were removed from the Kaaba, but the people were spared. The city that had persecuted the Muslims for 20 years was treated with remarkable mercy. Abu Sufyan watched as the 360 idols were removed and destroyed. The world he had fought to preserve was being dismantled before his eyes. And he was not fighting anymore. The story could have ended there, the defeated enemy accepting the inevitable. But something unexpected happened. Abu Sufyan didn't just accept Islam. He embraced it. Less than a month after his conversion, at the Battle of Hunain, Abu Sufyan stood firm when many newer Muslims fled. Muhammad noticed. He rewarded Abu Sufyan generously from the spoils of war. His family rose to prominence in the new Islamic order. His son, Muawiyah, became one of Muhammad's scribes. The Umayyads, once enemies of Islam, would become one of its most powerful dynasties. At Taif, he lost an eye in combat. Later, in the Byzantine wars under Caliph Abu Bakr, he lost the other at Yarmouk, urging soldiers, fight for Allah. 6 years after Muhammad's death, Abu Sufyan fought at Yarmouk, one of the most decisive battles in history, where the Muslims defeated the Byzantine Empire. He was elderly, partially blind, but he was there. That tells us something. At Yarmouk, Abu Sufyan lost one of his sons in battle. When told to mourn, he reportedly said, "Should I cry for him when he is in paradise?" The question everyone asks is, was his conversion genuine? I think that's the wrong question. The right question is, did his life after conversion demonstrate the values of Islam? And by most measures, it did. Abu Sufyan died around 653 CE, more than 20 years after his conversion. He had lived to see Islam spread across Arabia, into Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and Persia. The religion he had fought to destroy had become an empire. His descendants would rule the Islamic world for nearly a century. The Umayyad Caliphate would stretch from Spain to India. The merchant's family had become a dynasty. Abu Sufyan's story is important because it's so human. He wasn't a demon. He wasn't a saint. He was a man who lived through extraordinary times and had to make impossible choices. His story reminds us that history isn't simple. What fascinates me is the transformation. Not just his conversion, lots of people convert, but his willingness to fight for what he had once opposed, to raise his children in a faith he had spent decades trying to destroy. That requires something profound. History remembers Abu Sufyan in paradox. Islam's greatest enemy who became one of its supporters. The man who fought Muhammad for 20 years, then stood beside him. The defender of the old world who helped build the new one. Perhaps his story teaches us something important. That people are capable of change. That enemies can become allies. That the human heart is more complex than our simple narratives allow. Abu Sufyan ibn Harb, merchant, warrior, convert, father of a dynasty. A man who stood at the crossroads of history and, in the end, chose a different path than the one he had walked his entire life. His story is not simple. But then, neither is history. And neither are we. Kindly subscribe to the Muslim Millennium for more Islamic history, stories of the prophets, the Sahaba and more. Jazakumullahu khairan. Turn on post notification for next post.